Matthew, thank you for doing this. Really appreciate it. We won't take too much of your time. Could you briefly tell us a little bit about yourself, and B, kind of where you are, just so that the students can understand exactly where you're broadcasting from?
Okay, so, well, where to start? I mean, I never did the sort of course that you guys are doing. I finished university and went on to a BBC local radio training scheme, which in effect taught me a lot of the stuff that you're learning and will continue to learn with Kevin. That was over 20 years ago, unfortunately now. And then I went into local radio, and I worked in Somerset, in Bristol for a bit, in Newcastle, and in Lincolnshire. And then from Lincolnshire went on to work at Radio Newcastle again, where I then sort of got involved in some of the TV side of things, and other early bits of text. And then from there moved down to London, worked in Newsround for a bit, for 3 years, which was a fantastic experience. And then went abroad and worked in Belgrade, just after the President Milosevic had been taken to The Hague. Then worked in Jerusalem for 3-4 years, New York during the financial crash and Obama's presidency, Obama's election, over to Brussels, and then back to the UK now, where I work for the Today programme and do radio and TV for BBC News. At the moment, I'm in this building. That's its. That's how high up it goes. And maybe at the end of this, I'll just go and show you a video glimpse into the newsroom here, which is huge. But this is the BBC's headquarters in Oxford Circus in London, and new broadcasting house, and it's effectively sort of 8 floors, 9 floors of news, but also current affairs, and so radio, TV, and then online as well, and an increasing presence in online. And so the organisation is doing a lot at the moment to try and work out where it wants to go with online, where it should go with online, whether online is just text, is it video, what is it, how do people consume it, do they consume it on BBC platforms, do they consume it on Facebook, do they consume it on Snapchat, where do they want to consume their BBC output? So there's sort of all that future thinking going on, while you've still got, if you like, mediums of radio and television, which the BBC is still providing output from these buildings and a few others as well, and of course in local radio places around the country.
I guess that brings you on to my first question. I'm going to throw it open to the students in a minute, but at the moment you work for the Today programme, which to the average person in the street is a radio programme, but to what extent are you looking to make that a multimedia job?
So, and not just me making it a multimedia job, but also the programme trying to go multimedia. I mean, there's a really big push to try and do that at the moment, and to try and say, look, what we've got is we've got a radio story, and we've put quite a lot of effort into that story. We've done quite a lot of journalism on that story. We've found out quite a lot of facts. Why would you only use the information that you've gathered at 8:10 in the morning on Radio 4? You not think to yourself about how you could take that information, part of it or all of it, and package it up in some different way for the website. Either just a simple text article, or a little bit of video, or taking the audio and using it either as part of a podcast, or how are you going to take that information and put it elsewhere? So a lot of what I do now involves this thing that I'm talking to you on, the smartphone. If I'm out and about, if I'm at an event somewhere that is newsworthy, I'll video it. And I won't just use my radio equipment to gather the sounds and to report on what's happening for the Today programme. I'll also use my iPhone to video it and to send it in to the BBC so that they can use it on their online pages. And I don't know, Kevin, if you've already looked at it, but you know, you guys can go and if you type in my name and BBC and Budapest and refugees, you'll come up with a bit of video that I did when I was in Budapest for the Today programme, which was all filmed on the iPhone, and which was something that lots and lots of people watched just over a year ago when all those refugees were in Budapest railway station.
I showed them actually your live into the 6 from the motorway, but I will make sure they see that stuff in the station as well.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, so it's not just me, it's also the programme and the wider BBC thinking about, I'm just checking these people up. It really is live, I'm going to move. Look at that. People coming on a tour of the BBC. I'm going to see if I can sit in a really dull box here which says it's booked, but hopefully it's not. This is what passes for a meeting room in the BBC.
Pod.
There you go, luxury. Basically what people are thinking about here all the time, but not just in the BBC, but also in newspapers, in other TV stations, in radio stations, is how you take that information and you make it accessible to everybody, not just the people who listen to your radio program or watch your TV. And you'll see it on the newspapers as well at the moment. You know, if you go to the New York Times, if you went there 5 years ago, that was purely text-based, most of it. Now they'll have videos to accompany things, and you all know this from your own experience. And different media organisations and their journalists are trying to work out how they package up stuff in a different way and put it out there so that people continue to come to those outlets to consume their news.
We're actually speaking to someone from the New York Times next week, so that's a good tee up for that. But let me throw that to the students and see what questions they've got for you. Who wants to go first? Anne?
Oh, hello, Matthew.
Hello.
Nice to see you and talk to you. I do listen to the Today programme quite often. I don't think I caught it when you were on in the summer, but one of the things that really irritates me is when the presenters, it's mainly John Humphreys and Michelle Hussein, constantly tend to interrupt the people they're interviewing. Now, when you're live on radio, is that just something you have to do because you've got a controlled time slot, or is that kind of an interviewing style?
Yeah, I think it does depend. I mean, you know, John is sort of famous for it, like Jeremy Paxman was on Newsnight before him. I think, I mean, personally, I think there is a increasing tendency in BBC radio to be wedded to a particular length of time slot for an item. So, for instance, they're doing the running order for tomorrow at the moment, and it will be finalised by about 5:45 tomorrow morning. But in that running order, they're looking at time slots, and they're saying, right, we've got this item, and we're going to spend 4 minutes on it. Once you've read the introduction, you've then got 3.5 minutes. And once your guest has stumbled through their first answer, you've only got 2.5 minutes left. So you might not get to the subject matter quickly enough that you want to talk about, and therefore you interrupt them and you press them on it. Personally, I think it's a problem because increasingly a lot of people listen to podcasts, and podcasts can be any length you want. And if someone's saying something interesting that's slightly left field, then actually you can go with it. And the podcast can turn out to be 17 minutes long instead of 12, which is what you originally planned. And, you know, I think a lot of people do get frustrated about it. In fact, I was talking to one of the BBC bosses last week, and even he was asking, you know, why is it at 7:15 in the morning you've got a guest on who's really interesting, and you're saying, I'm really sorry, but I'm going to have to stop you there, we've got to move on. Why do you have to move on, he was asking, because the next thing that you have to hit, the next moment you have to hit is at 8 o'clock when the pips come. So I think there is, and I experience it more on the Today programme than perhaps other programmes, but it exists everywhere. There is a sense of, that's how much time we allocated for this, therefore that's the time we'll give it. And I think that probably does push presenters into interrupting. I mean, I've been there presenting when someone's buzzed in my ear, you've only got 30 seconds left, you want to ask them this, so then you interrupt them. But I agree with you, I think it can be really annoying, unless someone's going wildly off the point or they're trying to avoid the question, when it's actually there is a reason to do it. If you've got a politician who's trying to avoid the question, who's answering the same way 3 or 4 times, then yeah, interrupt them and get them back on track.
Okay, next question.
Hi Matthew. I was wondering, what skills do you think are going to be the most important to be heard in 2016 to get yourself seen? What skills do we need to be focusing on most?
What, in terms of getting yourselves noticed
Yeah.
when you're making reports?
Yeah.
I would be guided by what you like to see and hear, first of all. You know, who do you think is good when you listen to them, when you see them? And why do you think they're good? And why do you like what they do? Why do you like the news that they provide? Because media organisations are absolutely obsessed with where are the younger audiences coming from? And that's essentially you and your generation. And so if you focus on what you like in the way of the presenters that you relate to, in the journalists that you relate to, in the stories that you relate to, if you focus on that, then you will be serving your own generation. And if you're serving your own generation, then that's exactly what media organisations want. More generally, I think there is a, years ago, for television certainly, but also for radio, there was this sense that you had to be quite standoff from the story, you had to be quite disengaged from it, and that you couldn't put your own thoughts and emotions into it. And there's a subtle balance between putting your own emotions into it and picking sides in a story. But as long as you can stay on the right side of that line, then I think one of the things that people increasingly want to see and want to hear is what, for want of a better word, you could call authenticity. So they want people to be real. So I would say, as well, be guided by that. Try and be natural when you're reporting. Try and be conversational and chatty. And one of the things that I always found was really hard at the beginning was trying not to write things and then speak them in the way that you think they ought to be on radio or TV. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So a lot of people early on fall into a trap, and indeed later on fall into a trap, where they will talk to a TV camera. They'll say to their friends back in the pub after the story, you know, it was incredible, it was so sad to see what we were seeing. There were 2 dead children there, and the parents were weeping, and it was just heartbreaking. But the moment they stand in front of a TV camera, they'll say, this is a scene of utter devastation. Why would you go so sort of unnatural? Why not say what you would say to your friends in the pub, you know, within reason editorially, on camera? And I think if you try and be natural, and if you try and follow the journalists that you like and you relate to, then I would have thought that that's probably a good start.
So when you're doing a piece to camera, like how scripted is your piece?
Yeah, they I don't know, I mean, I have to see what Kevin teaches you in terms of, you see, when I first started doing TV, they taught me, right, don't script it, just stand in front of the camera, it should be 3 sentences long, 20, 25 seconds maximum, don't get in the way of the pictures. Now, probably all of that still stands. But, you know, it depends. If you're doing a piece to camera about something that's really politically quite charged and difficult, you know, the situation in the Middle East, you know, what does Shimon Peres's death mean for the future of Israel? Then that's pretty difficult to do unscripted. If you're doing a piece to camera about how people feel about the death of Shimon Peres in Israel, then that's probably easier, because that's well, just look around here and you can see people are crying, and they're, you know, this is a man who they held close to their hearts over the years, blah, blah, blah. But as I said, if it's a political thing, you probably will want to script it. And so then the art comes, which a lot of journalists will tell you, TV and radio will tell you is not the case, but I fervently believe it is. The art then comes of taking those words that you've written and performing them in a way that feels natural, as if you haven't written them. And a lot of TV people will say it's not an act, it's not a performance. Of course, it's a performance. You know, you're on TV. There's a screen and a camera in between you and the people you're talking to. You know, look at vloggers. A lot of them look as if they're just talking to camera, but they're still performing within a certain way. And I think, yes, just speak a piece to camera if you're doing a descriptive one. That's always easier. This is where the car came off the road. This is the embankment it slid down. That's where it hit the tree. But if you're doing a piece to camera out on the dockside about how the Environment Agency's new flood plan is going to stop next year's landslide, then that's probably a bit more technical, and you probably do want to write it, I think.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
Josh?
Yeah, hello Matthew.
Hi.
You said that you first started off as being a reporter for BBC Newsround, and then you went on to work as a Middle East correspondent for the BBC. What made you move from those two positions?
Personally, I love foreign news, and I've been out to the Middle East a couple of times for Newsround, and
Yeah.
it was just somewhere that got under my skin. So it was just personal interest, actually. Foreign news was something that attracted me more. I always wanted to go to war zones. I always wanted to experience that and see what that was like. And you know, looking back, I think actually that still stands to a large extent, because I feel those stories are really existential, and they genuinely are about life and death. So it was a personal thing, really.
Katie?
Hello Matthew. When you report
Hi.
on dangerous situations like in the Mexican drug war, how do you prepare for them?
Sorry.
How do you prepare for reporting in a dangerous situation? Like we showed the video here in Juarez recently. How do you prepare for that kind of trip?
Emotionally, I mean, obviously journalistically, you prepare for it in the way that you would prepare any other trip. To a certain extent, actually, although in a way, you need to have the facts and the figures and the news in your mind more before you go, because often in dangerous places, you can't spend time saying, oh, what was that? How many people died last week? I'll check it out, I'll look it up. You know, you might not have the connectivity, but you also might not have the time. Or you might be in a situation where you don't want to be staring at your iPhone, checking out the facts, or your notebook, checking out the facts and figures, because it's actually dangerous and you need to be looking around you to work out whether you're still safe. So, in a way, you prepare more by making sure you know the story inside out before you go, journalistically. Emotionally, I think I'm not sure you do prepare emotionally. I think you just, over the years, when I went to Juarez, I'd been reporting for the BBC for 15 years. I don't think anything prepares you for the first time you see a dead body, for instance. And in some ways, actually, I'd argue, I think it gets more difficult over the years, because perhaps the first time you see a dead body, you're inclined to be very emotionally detached, maybe, some people. Certainly, I think I was. And then over the years, you start to see the wider impact that each death has. And maybe that's sort of hardwired into your brain. So in Juarez, I remember our team was really quite affected by what we saw, even though what we saw was 100 meters away, certainly in the case of the 7-year-old boy, if that's the report that you watched. And yet the emotion was right in our face. So it was the emotion that set us all off. It was the same in reporting the Haiti earthquake. I remember, one time in the hospital after 24 hours, 48 hours after the earthquake, my producer wandered off one way and I wandered off the other way, and we came back together, and you could see that we'd both been crying. And we sort of checked that we were both okay, and we were, that was fine, but I think, we sort of, so I think the impact in Haiti on me personally and on my producer was perhaps more than it had been in similar situations in the past. I remember going to the Turkish earthquake in 1999, where the destruction was arguably just as bad. Certainly those lives were destroyed in just the same way as they were in Haiti. But emotionally, 15 years later, Haiti hit me more, I think because I'd seen more death and agony from death in the interim. So I would suggest, I know this is a long answer, but I would suggest that actually, depending on your personality, you might actually find the first few times you go to something like that, and it needn't be an earthquake, it could be a crash on the M4, but the first few times you go to something like that, you might find it's easier to cope with than you think. Psychologists talk about the fact that, we're like a glass of water, and your sort of emotion tops up and tops up and tops up and tops up until it spills over. And it's then when it spills over that you go off and cry in the corner of a hospital in Haiti.
Matthew, could I just interrupt? You mentioned a 7-year-old child you saw there. You've got 2 young children of your own. How's being a father affected you as a journalist when you go to places like that?
I think it does affect you, because you instantly start to think about your own children. So in Libya, I was, when Colonel Gaddafi fell in Libya, this is slightly different, but when Colonel Gaddafi fell in Libya, I was among a group of journalists who got held inside the hotel that we'd been staying in by gunmen for 4 or 5 days. And at one point it felt as though we were going to be used as human shields by the defeated Gaddafi troops. And I had a 9-month-old daughter at that point, who was my first child. And I remember thinking, I can't leave my child without a father. And that was a particularly low moment. So I think having kids then affects your ability to, your desire sometimes to go to some of these places. It doesn't with some people, with me it has, because it's affected my desire to go to places where my life might be in danger, and therefore I might pass that on to my kids. And the only thing I would say, many of you, presumably some of you will go on to amazing careers in journalism. Some of those careers will be in political journalism, and you'll never set foot outside Westminster, although I advise that you should sometimes. Others of you may well go to war zones. And I remember when I went to the Iraq War in 2003, long before I had kids or had met my future wife, I remember my then girlfriend ringing me up, or rather I rang her, because I was on a boat, a Royal Navy boat in the middle of the Gulf. And she said, "Have you spoken to your mum recently?" And I said, "No." And she said, "I think you should." And basically, what I learned later on is that, in fact, these are the words of Alan Johnson, who was a colleague in Gaza, who was kidnapped for 4 months in Gaza while I was out in the Middle East. And Alan said to me what he learned out of that experience was that you take your family with you. You take them all with you when you go somewhere dangerous. And whether that's kids or your mother and father or a brother or a sister or nephews and nieces, they're all watching. And you may feel perfectly safe. You're on a Royal Navy boat floating around the Gulf, seeing nothing violent in any way, shape or form. But they see every day that Baghdad is getting pounded and hit by billion-dollar missiles, and they're nervous for you. So that would be the one thing I would say to be aware of if you end up going to dangerous places. Just be aware that back home there's somebody who's thinking that you're in the shit and that you're about to die, and maybe you ought to give them a call once in a while.
Matthew, with the risk of sounding a bit like John Humphreys, we're slightly limited for time here, so I just have 2 more questions from the floor, and then we'll move on. Who had a question?
Hi Matthew. Has
Hi.
anything ever happened in a broadcast behind you while you're doing a live camera piece where you had to think, right, I've got to change what I'm saying now, or you've had to change the angle of the story or anything like that?
In terms of lives, a woman once fell over in the background when I was doing floods in Yorkshire 15 years ago. But I didn't notice, the studio didn't notice. I mean, if what you're asking is when the unexpected happens in the back of a live shot, I don't think that matters. And I think if you're aware of it, then you can, you should talk about it. If you're live, if you've got time, you should talk about it and make reference to it. And that goes back to what I was saying at the beginning about being authentic. You know, be part of the real world. Things change, shit happens when you're on air, and just react to it. In the past, reporters would have stood there holding their microphone like this and being very stiff about it. Now people expect you to react to the world around you. If what you're talking about is doing a stand-up that's pre-recorded and something happens around you to change the story, absolutely react to it. If you're in the middle of a stand-up, I mean, sometimes, you know, if something happens while your stand-up's going on, you know, I don't know, to take a ridiculous example, but well, maybe you are on the scene of a car crash and you're up on the motorway bridge looking down on the car crash and the fire crews are working on it, and you're saying, you know, they've been working on getting the injured out of this vehicle for the last 3 hours, and imagine the agony that those people are going through at the moment while the motorway remains blocked. And then while you're talking, there's a big cheer goes up. Well, don't stop talking there. Turn around, take on board what the cheer is, and carry on talking. And actually, while I'm talking to you, that's the moment where they brought out the mother from this car. And look, she's waving, she's smiling, she's okay. That's a relief. You know, just think of something to add, because actually, that's a really good piece to camera. That's a moment that you have recorded with your camera crew. So do try and react to things. If you do find yourself in that situation, don't try and be too complicated about it. Because if you try to be too complicated about it, you'll screw up the words. Your camera crew will be angry with you that you got in the way of the shot of what was actually happening, that you screwed up the actual moment, if you like. So try and be simple, but also take that breath, look around you, see what's happening, pause, and then go on to use one phrase to say, oh, and look, she's out of the car, that's good news.
Amy?
Yeah, I was just wondering whether you think of like a specific situation where everything's just gone completely wrong, and how did you go about recovering from it?
Don't mention your producer in New York.
Which one, Kevin?
I said, don't mention your producer in New York. Making things go wrong.
Yeah. Actually, there are two thoughts here. One is it going wrong in a kind of, so there's one example. There was a bombing in Sinai in Egypt, just across the border from Israel, which we all went down to in the middle of the night. While I was live, the 17th hour, on a really hot day, it was evening, and while I'm live, my cameraman is sort of telling me to get closer to him, and there's hardly any space in between me and the camera, and we're standing on a mini roundabout in the road, and he was basically pulling me towards him, and I looked behind, and there was a bus that was going around that roundabout, literally scraping the back of my shirt, and its wheel was just coming to sort of, you know, it wouldn't have taken me under, but it felt like it could have done. I mean, on something like that, you just say, you know, we're in the middle of a round, I'm talking about, you know, there I am in the middle of an answer about politics, about who might have planted this bomb, about Israel's reaction, and suddenly there's a bus taking up the shot. Well, if you ignore it, that's really distracting. Nobody's listening to what you're saying. So, you know, go with it. Oh, there's a bus going past. I'm sorry, we're going to have to move the camera back. Right, there goes Chris, my cameraman, moving the camera back. It's got a bit wobbly for now. Don't worry about it. Right, the bus has gone. Where was I? Oh, yes, I was talking about who might have carried out this bomb. That's absolutely absolutely fine, and I would argue that's it's not just fine. That's the way you should go. There was another moment where I thought about when you asked the question about something going wrong. Sometimes stuff goes wrong, and fine, just give up on the piece of camera. Start again. Sometimes, your camera crew will be saying, come on, we got to do this, we got to do this. If you are like me, where you actually just need to stand there for a bit, maybe you haven't physically written it down, but you've thought to yourself about what you're going to say, and you can't quite say it in the right order, or the words are coming out slightly wrong, or you're using the same word twice in the 20 seconds, which doesn't always sound great. I often say to my camera crews, right, rather than waste your time, you set up. I'm going to walk up and down this street talking to myself, looking like an idiot for the next 5 minutes to get the words stuck in my head. And right now I'm ready to go. I've practiced it. Camera crew's ready to go. You're not wasting time. You're not filming it and getting 10 seconds into it each time and thinking, bugger, I mucked that one up again. There's nothing wrong in stopping the process for a bit and just calming yourself down and getting it right in your head and then going back and doing it. There's nothing wrong, as long as you don't do it too often. There's one correspondent, who I won't mention, but who famously did 76 pieces to camera in an hour and a half at a bomb site. And when they got back, the camera crew, she then said to the camera crew, why do we have no shots of the bomb site? And the camera crew said, because you spent the whole hour and a half doing pieces to camera. So don't go down that route. But there's nothing wrong in spending 5 minutes trying to do a piece to camera, and then you and the camera team thinking to yourself, do you know what, it's not working. It's not the right location, it's not the right words, it's not the right light, it's not the right sound, whatever it is. We'll find somewhere better a bit later on. There's nothing wrong in stopping the process. And just one thing, and Kevin, if you want to, you can go into more detail on this later, but there might be a time, as there was for me, when a story just completely blows up in your face. And I'm not particularly proud talking about this, but we did a story, Kevin wasn't the producer, but I did a story out of New York where the story was all ready to go, and then I went off on holiday for a few days, and the story went out in the UK, and in the meantime they put a graphic to that story. It was about American troops who have had limb injuries in war, and it was about research that was trying to see if you could grow back part of that limb to make their lives easier. And the research was in a very early stage, and they're still doing it, I think. There was nothing wrong with the story per se, but what they did back here in London, in the old headquarters of the BBC, was to make a graphic which literally showed in cartoon form a hand with no fingers on it, and then fingers growing back, which was entirely unscientific, nothing to do with what we were talking about, but made the whole story a laughing stock. And that, Kevin will tell you later, was, that was a particularly difficult moment for me, because essentially it got ridiculed around the world. And, there are a couple of lessons from that. One is, and there are other journalists who've been in this sort of situation. One is, take on board the lessons, keep control of your story, don't let other people finish it off, and make sure you see the end product before it goes to air. Be happy that you're happy with every aspect of it, whether it's TV, radio, online, whatever it is. That you can account for it, that you can happily say that is right. Would you go to the pub at the end of the day and your mates saw it on TV or online or something, and they say, wow, that bit's amazing, and you go, yeah, it's not quite like that. Well, if you would, then you shouldn't be putting it out. So make sure that you have control of the process and the story, because otherwise it will go wrong for you. And if it does go wrong for you, and at times it will, and that's part of the learning process, then realise that it's part of the learning process, that there's nothing that you can do to take it back. If you've made a mistake, hold up your hands and admit the mistake, but don't let it knock your confidence too much.
Okay, we've got one more question, and then I have a quick one as well, then we'll wrap up. Kelly.
Yeah, hi. With news gathering, how have you found the transition from Schule the journalism to that and across between other sources like social media and smartphone?
Sorry, the transition from traditional
Yeah.
TV, radio to smartphone,
Yep.
digital.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
I keep saying to people in this, well, actually, I've stopped saying to people in this building in case they realise the secret. I don't think there's any difference. It's just the same thing. I started in local radio. Some of my colleagues started in newspapers. Some of you will start in newspapers. It's the same thing. It's about going out, finding out information, and putting it together in a form that people can digest and want to digest and are interested to read or watch or listen to. So for me, it's not a transition. You know, when I was on the side of that motorway in Hungary, I was there for, in theory, I was there for radio. And unfortunately, I think a lot of my colleagues would have just done the radio job. And in fact, the producer that I was with, who is a fantastic, amazing radio producer, he said to me, just get on the phone. Get on the phone to London and do lives, do a round of lives, which we did first. And then I said, how do we do this on video? And he said, I don't know. So, well, ring up London, ask them what their Skype username is in London. Let's do it in video. And we could do that. And, you know, if we hadn't done that, we wouldn't have shown that story on the 6 o'clock news that night. We wouldn't have been on the BBC One special that night. We wouldn't have been on Newsnight that night. And actually, more importantly, we wouldn't have given audiences the sort of the ability to see and feel what was going on in the way that they didn't get that at that time on ITV, on Sky, on CNN, on whatever. Actually, I think on CNN they did, because CNN had a satellite up there at that time. But so to me, it's using an iPhone and tweeting about what I'm seeing around me is no different to having a notepad and writing an article about it or writing a radio report. It's a different tool, it's a different medium, of course it is. The only difficulty that comes with it is if you've got a boss who says, you've got to tweet, you've got to do a radio piece, you've got to do a TV piece, you've got to do this, that, and the other. Because it's impossible, because your workload is just increased too much. And you know, I remember that night, at midnight, while we were still walking with the refugees along the road, I spoke to the editor on the Today programme, and remember at the beginning I said I went there as a radio reporter primarily for the Today programme. I spoke to the overnight editor of the Today programme, and he said, what have you got for us for tomorrow morning? And I said, to be honest, I can do you a package, it's going to come in late, we haven't got that much, but it's going to be okay, it's going to be all right. And he said, well, listen, forget it, why package? Are you going to follow these guys through the night? And I said, yeah. And he said, okay, tomorrow morning, 8:30, I want you on air with 3 minutes, just talk for 3 minutes about what you've seen and what you've experienced. And so that's what I did. And that was a good editorial decision made in London. It meant I had the time to carry on with tweeting, with doing stuff on the iPhone for Newsnight and the others. It meant I wasn't sat there for 2 or 3 hours packaging a radio report, which actually would then have been out of date. And, you know, it was a creative solution. So, again, sorry, some of these answers are probably far too long, but go back to your original point. For me, there's no difference. It's all just a different means of delivery. There are, of course, different skills in the way that you write a tweet. There are different skills in the way that you write a blog post to a text article for the New York Times. There are different skills in the way that you do a TV report as to a video report online. But essentially, it's all the same skills, taking information, packaging it up for the outlet, and putting it out there.
One final question for me. These guys are about, in a year's time, will be embarking on their careers in the world of media. What 2 or 3 things do they need in their emotional and their physical kit bag before they set out on a journey?
Well, the physical stuff, I would say so much of what you do now is about connectivity. Wherever you are in the world, you've got to be able to connect. So that's about making sure that you can get online and know how to get online. I'm sure you all already do anyway. But you know, you might find yourself in places where all you've got is a mobile phone signal. Do you know how to use that mobile phone signal, either through your phone or through a MiFi, to get your material back to whoever you're filing for? I think increasingly, you can do this if you want with a smartphone, and in a year's time, smartphones are going to be even better. You can increasingly do it with a smartphone. I would argue against trying to edit stuff on a smartphone, unless it's a real rush job, because you know, it's just practically easier to do it on a laptop, so you probably would want a laptop. And you know, depending on what sort of media you're doing, if you're trying to produce really good high-end HD TV video pieces, then you're probably going to want a proper camera. But you know, you can use the SLRs that record video these days, and loads of people are doing that. So if you're doing video stuff, don't forget the microphones. You need decent microphones. But I think the actual amount of kit that you need now has really decreased a lot. On the emotional side, I think it's going to be potentially really tough. Well, it's always been tough to get into media, but I think now a lot of people really want to do it. I think you need to ask yourself, do you want to do it because you want to be famous? Or do you want to do it because you want to tell people about the world around them, whether it's their local area or it literally is the world? Is it a mixture of the two? It's not wrong to have an ego and to be wanting to do it, and a lot of people are driven by the ego. It certainly plays a part for me. But I guess you've therefore got to be ready emotionally for knockbacks, for editors who are not prepared to pay more than, you know, who are not prepared to pay a fair rate when something's taken you a week to do. On the preparation side, you know, it seems to me a lot of people moving into media now have their own blogs, they have their own websites. Do you think it's needed? And if you do, have you got it? Does it look good? Is it a showcase for your work? You know, have you done any reporting from a bizarre location? Where's your next holiday? Are you going on holiday in the next 6 months, where actually there's a couple of interesting things happening, and you can take a camera and a microphone and you could actually do some reporting and try and get it on your local radio station or on national radio? Could you push it onto a website somewhere? You know, can you do that to give yourself that little bit extra? There was one frightening thing that I saw personally when Libya collapsed, and we got out of that hotel in the Rixos hotel in Tripoli after those days being held captive. And the group of 30 or so journalists who've been kept in there, we all went to the border with Tunisia to leave Libya at the same time. We were all there. And as we were leaving, because Gaddafi had only fallen a few days before, as we were leaving, a load of journalists, of course, were crossing the border from Tunisia into Libya, into this situation which arguably was only just getting even worse. And a lot of them were with TV crews, and a lot of them were with proper companies, and a lot of them, some of them, were people like you, who were like, great, it's a fucking war, I'm gonna go. And they were turning up without flak jackets, and they were turning up without helmets, and they were turning up with their small kit bag, and they were so excited. And they didn't even have in the background, they were going to string there, they were going to do freelance work there, and they were going to see if they could get some stories out from there. And hopefully, they were probably all absolutely all right, but they didn't have the backup of a company behind them. And I think that's something those of you who want to go to war zones are going to have to really think about properly, because it's increasingly the fact, especially for newspapers, that they will happily say, oh, so-and-so did us some nice work from Basingstoke last week, didn't they? And didn't they also do that nice stuff on the referendum? And now they're emailing us from Tripoli shall we take their stuff from Tripoli? But that company often has no emotional attachment to you as a journalist. They have no physical attachment to you, so you're not insured by them, probably, often. So if you get into difficulty, are they going to do anything for you? And those are really important questions. If you get shot and you're in the worst hospital in the world, is the newspaper that you've done 2 articles for in the last month from that company, from that country, are they going to fly you out of there? So at the toughest end of this, I would argue you need to ask those questions. If you're going to try and spend the first year out of university looking at the rise of, whether Labour voters are going to continue going to UKIP or will they actually defect to the Tories, for instance, then it's a different kettle of fish altogether. Of course it is. But do you think about your safety if you go to dangerous places? Who, at the end of the day, is the ultimate backstop if you get into trouble? Is there anybody? And if there isn't anybody, how are you going to get out of there? So there's a rather big thing.
So Matthew, thank you very much. Listen, I think like Steve Wallace said, this has been a fascinating insight into the life of a BBC reporter. It's all being recorded and it's going to be up on YouTube sometime quite soon. So if you want to look back at it, you're more than welcome to. Quickly, what are you working on now? What's the next project?
Doing some stuff actually on Brexit, trying to go back to somewhere that did vote to leave, and what do they actually want from the negotiations, what are people expecting. So there's some quite interesting stuff there. And trying to go to Germany, catch up with a refugee family that I came across with last year. How are they getting on, but also how's Germany getting on? So,
lovely. Thank you very much.
All right, mate.
All right, cheers, all the best. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Good luck. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.